We have waited, preparing to strike. And now we have returned to rule the night.
Hey everyone, before we go into the gory supernatural chaos that is Darkstalkers, let's take a trip back in time to when Capcom decided to do something a little different. Sure, Street Fighter was ruling the arcade scene with its fireballs and uppercuts, but Capcom wasn't about to stop there. Oh no, they had bigger plans, a vision that involved vampires, werewolves, and even mummies duking it out in a fight for the ages. But where did this all begin? And how did we end up with a fighting game franchise that feels like a monster mash of epic proportions? Let's jump into the origins of Darkstalkers and how it helped set the stage for an entirely new era of fighting games. Welcome back to Retro Pocket. If you enjoy what you see, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing content. The origins of Darkstalkers, setting the stage for a new era of fighters. It all started in the early 1990s. Capcom had already cemented itself as a major player in the world of fighting games with Street Fighter II, which was a monumental success, not just in terms of sales, but in establishing the one-on-one fighting genre. But Capcom wasn't satisfied with just Ryu and Ken trading Hadoukens. They wanted to go darker. And what better way to do that than to delve into the world of Gothic horror? So, they cooked up Darkstalkers, also known as Vampire in Japan. Unlike the grounded martial arts of Street Fighter, this was a world brimming with vampires, demons, succubi, and all kinds of supernatural creatures that looked like they walked straight out of a Universal monster movie. Capcom had essentially created a monster fighting game, but there was more to it than just slapping iconic monsters into a fighting engine. The series took place in a Gothic horror universe, a sort of Earth Makai hybrid. Makai was an alternate realm full of creepy supernatural beings, and when it started merging with Earth, all hell broke loose, literally. The Darkstalkers, creatures of legend, emerged, and they weren't here for a tea party. No, they wanted to battle it out to see who would reign supreme in this newly chaotic world. The setup was a unique blend of the supernatural, action, and some good old-fashioned brawling. Each character had its own backstory and motivation for fighting, whether it was for control of Earth, survival, or pure power. Darkstalkers was Capcom's way of combining their passion for fighters with their love for monsters, and it all clicked. One of the coolest aspects of Darkstalkers was its cast of characters. These weren't just reskinned Street Fighter clones. Capcom was hell-bent, pun intended, on creating a roster that was as memorable as it was diverse. We had Dmitry Maximoff, the suave vampire lord who could put Dracula to shame. His goal? To rule the night, of course, but with style. Then there was Morrigan Ainsland, the seductive succubus who became the face of the franchise. And let's be real, she's probably appeared in more crossovers than any other Darkstalkers character. Morrigan was out for fun and chaos, but her carefree attitude masked a dangerous power. Next up, Felicia, the Catwoman. Literally, she wasn't just a fighter, she dreamed of becoming a famous pop star. Yeah, because that's what we all aspire to when we're half human, half feline. Add in Lord Raptor, the heavy metal zombie, Bishamon, the cursed samurai, and Anakaris, the Egyptian pharaoh, and you had a roster that was just dripping with personality. What made the characters so great was that they were grounded in classic horror tropes but brought to life with a unique Capcom twist. Each one had an elaborate backstory and a distinct fighting style, from Dimitri's bat-infused attacks to Felicia's claw-based moves. The sheer creativity and variety in the cast made Darkstalkers stand out among the fighting games of its era. Now, let's talk gameplay. At its core, Darkstalkers shared a lot with Street Fighter II. I mean, why mess with success, right? But while the basics, like 6-button combat and special moves, were similar, Darkstalkers introduced several new mechanics that made it feel like a completely different beast. First off, it was fast. Like, really fast. The pace of battles was cranked up to 11, making matches feel frantic and unpredictable. Special moves came at you hard and fast, and the animation was some of the smoothest and most detailed seen in a 2D fighter at the time. In fact, Darkstalkers was one of the first games to use 16-bit color animation, which made the sprites pop with a vibrancy that was practically unheard of back then. Another key difference was the super meter, which allowed players to pull off devastating X moves and ultimate attacks. The more you fought, the more this meter filled, giving you access to some absolutely insane finishing moves that could turn the tide of battle in a second. This was a mechanic that would later be adapted into the Street Fighter Alpha and Marvel vs. Capcom series, but it started right here in Darkstalkers. And let's not forget the air blocking, something that was relatively new at the time. This added an extra layer of strategy, as players could defend themselves even in mid-air, making it harder for opponents to pin them down with relentless aerial assaults. Plus, characters had their own special traits. Dimitri could transform into a bat, while Bishamon could trap souls with his cursed armor. Every character felt unique to play, and this depth was a big part of why fans loved it. The development of Darkstalkers wasn't all smooth sailing though. The team at Capcom had initially wanted to make a fighting game featuring the Universal monsters, like Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy, but the licensing didn't work out. Instead of giving up, they decided to create their own monstrous cast of characters, and that's how Darkstalkers as we know it came to be. But even then, there were challenges. The game was built on the Street Fighter II engine, but the development team was tasked with pushing it to its limits. They had to ensure that the game not only looked and played better than Street Fighter, but also offered something new that would capture players' attention. One thing that really stood out was the attention to detail. The animators went all out, giving each character hundreds of frames of animation. It made the game look incredibly fluid, and every punch, kick, and special move had a sense of weight and impact that just felt right. Whether it was Dimitri's bat swarming around him, or Felicia's fur moving as she dashed across the screen, the little details helped Darkstalkers stand apart from its competitors. The first Darkstalkers game, The Night Warriors: Darkstalkers Revenge, was released in arcades in 1995, and it was an instant hit among fighting game fans. The blend of fast-paced action, quirky characters, and gothic atmosphere was like nothing else on the market. It wasn't long before Capcom followed it up with a sequel, Vampire Hunter, also known as Night Warriors: Darkstalkers Revenge. The sequel didn't just add more characters to the roster, though it did that too. It also introduced an alien overlord named Pyron, who arrived on Earth with an army of robots in tow, hell-bent on world domination. Naturally, the Darkstalkers weren't too keen on the idea and decided to step up to stop him. This gave the game a bit of an alien invasion twist, which, let's be real, only made things more bonkers in the best way possible. The third installment, Vampire Savior, or Darkstalkers 3, took things to a whole new level with the introduction of Jeddah, one of the nobles of Makai. Jeddah was on a mission to save the realm, but his methods involved trapping the Darkstalkers and using their souls to rebuild Makai in his image. Dark, right? This sequel is often regarded as the pinnacle of the series, with improved mechanics, more characters, and a storyline that was as bizarre as it was entertaining. As Darkstalkers grew in popularity, it branched out into other media as well. We got anime adaptations, comic book series, and even an American cartoon, though let's just say the cartoon took some creative liberties. Characters like Morrigan and Felicia also made cameos in other Capcom games, like the Marvel vs. Capcom series, cementing their place in gaming culture. Fans were clamoring for more, but despite the critical and commercial success of the original games, the series went into hibernation for years. There were rumors, teases, and even a re-release bundle called Darkstalkers Resurrection in 2013, but the demand for a new installment was never quite enough to push Capcom into full production. So, while Darkstalkers may not have had the long-running success of some of Capcom's other franchises, Street Fighter and Resident Evil, we're looking at you. It has maintained a dedicated cult following. The game's unique characters, fast-paced gameplay, and gothic atmosphere left a lasting impression on fans and the fighting game community at large. Let's not forget the iconic crossover appearances of some of its most beloved characters either. But why has Darkstalkers remained such an iconic piece of fighting game history, even without a major new entry for decades? Well, that brings us to the next part of the story. It's easy to see why Darkstalkers became a cult classic. First off, it took fighting games into a realm that had barely been touched at the time. Where else could you see vampires battling Egyptian mummies, or succubi throwing down with werewolves in a fast-paced, beautifully animated brawl? The unique combination of gothic horror, classic monster designs, and lightning-fast combat gave Darkstalkers an identity that no other fighting game could quite replicate. But it wasn't just about style. Darkstalkers had substance. The mechanics were tight, the animation was ahead of its time, and the roster was packed with characters that didn't just look cool, they played like nothing else out there. From the transformation abilities of Dimitri to the explosive, over-the-top moves of Pyron, every fight felt like a spectacle. This level of uniqueness kept players coming back even after other games tried to emulate it. Another reason Darkstalkers has stuck around in fans' hearts is how Capcom used it to experiment with gameplay ideas that would later influence their other fighting games. The Super Meter, for example, became a staple in Capcom fighters after it was introduced here. Air blocking, character-specific abilities, and even the animation techniques used in Darkstalkers all served as the building blocks for future titles. The DNA of Darkstalkers is alive and well in many of the fighting games we know and love today. We can't talk about Darkstalkers without acknowledging its impact on pop culture. If you've ever dived into the world of fighting games, you've probably come across Morrigan or Felicia at some point. Morrigan especially has become one of Capcom's most recognizable faces, showing up in everything from crossover titles like Marvel vs. Capcom to guest appearances in other games, anime, and even fan art that circulates around the internet. The game's monster-filled roster also resonated with fans of Gothic horror and supernatural stories. In an era when most fighting games were focused on martial arts and street brawls, Darkstalkers introduced a more fantastical, narrative-driven approach. Its spooky aesthetic drew in players who might not have otherwise cared about fighting games, turning Darkstalkers into something of a genre-defying franchise. And let's not forget the influence Darkstalkers had on the fighting game community as a whole. While it didn't quite achieve the same mainstream success as Street Fighter, it helped pave the way for more experimental, character-driven fighters. It showed that fighting games didn't always have to be about who could throw the best punch. Sometimes it was about who could summon the forces of darkness to engulf their enemy in a cloud of evil bats. That's the kind of creativity that left a mark on the genre and inspired future titles to push boundaries. Despite the love for the series, the Darkstalkers franchise has remained dormant for quite some time. Over the years, there have been teases, rumors, and even outright pleas from fans to bring the series back. Capcom, for its part, has acknowledged the passion behind the fandom, but hasn't quite pulled the trigger on a full-fledged revival. In 2010, Street Fighter producer Yoshinori Ono famously stated that bringing back Darkstalkers was his ultimate dream. He even went as far as to say that fan demand would be the key to making it happen, promising that if they could generate enough interest, Capcom would listen. And listen they did. Capcom received thousands of requests, and in 2012, the company re-released Darkstalkers Resurrection, a digital bundle of 2 games from the series, Night Warriors and Darkstalkers 3. While fans were excited, the re-release didn't sell as well as Capcom had hoped. This left the future of the franchise in limbo, with Capcom's executives reportedly disappointed by the sales figures. Despite the initial hype, Darkstalkers had not yet proven it could recapture the magic on a large scale. Still, hope is not lost. The series' cult status means that every few years, rumors start swirling about a new game or reboot. Yoshinori Ono has hinted at it multiple times, teasing fans with cryptic messages and playful nods during events. While there hasn't been an official announcement, the fact that the Darkstalkers name keeps popping up suggests that Capcom hasn't completely abandoned the idea. Even without a new entry in the series, Darkstalkers continues to live on through its characters and its influence on the fighting game genre. Morrigan, Felicia, Dimitri, and the rest of the gang still show up in crossover games, and their unique personalities remain beloved by fans. The gameplay mechanics that Darkstalkers pioneered, like the super meter and air blocking, have become staples of the genre, ensuring that the game's legacy endures even in the absence of new titles. Beyond that, the series' Gothic aesthetic continues to inspire game developers and artists alike. The combination of supernatural horror and over-the-top, cartoonish action was groundbreaking for its time, and remains a unique blueprint that other games occasionally draw from. In the same way that Street Fighter defined the martial arts fighter, Darkstalkers created a genre mashup that blended horror, humor, and action into something truly special. So, where does that leave us now? Will we ever see a new Darkstalkers game? While it's impossible to say for certain, one thing is clear: the demand is still there. Whether it's through passionate fan communities, YouTube documentaries like this one, or whispers at gaming conventions, people still want to see these iconic monsters return to the fight. Capcom knows this too. They've seen how the fighting game community rallied behind franchises like Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Capcom in the past, and there's no doubt that Darkstalkers has the potential to make a similar comeback. Maybe one day we'll finally get to see Morrigan, Dimitri, and the rest of the cast return in a glorious next-gen fighting game that reminds the world why Darkstalkers became such a beloved franchise in the first place. Until then, we can look back at the incredible legacy of Darkstalkers, a series that dared to be different, that blended horror with heart-pounding action, and that showed us that even monsters can be heroes in their own right. Whether you're a seasoned fighting game fan or new to the genre, there's no denying the lasting impact Darkstalkers has had on both gaming and pop culture. And who knows, maybe that dream of a new Darkstalkers game isn't so far off after all. Stay tuned, the night is still young. Darkstalkers, The Night Warriors, 1994, a new breed of fighters. Now let's take a step back to 1994, a golden era for arcades. Street Fighter was dominating the scene, but Capcom, never one to rest on its laurels, was cooking up something a little spookier, a little weirder, and a whole lot more monstrous. Let's dig into the game's story because, yes, this wasn't just about beating each other up, it had lore. At the heart of the plot was Dmitry Maximoff, a suave vampire lord who, naturally, believed that he should be the one to rule the demon world. Because, of course, there's a demon world. To settle the matter, he decided to hold a tournament on Earth to see who among the Darkstalkers was worthy of being crowned the ultimate ruler. But hold your horses, because not everyone was down for Dimitri's vampire agenda. Enter Pyron, an alien overlord who thought, why should these Earth monsters have all the fun? He decides to crash the party and claim the title of ruler for himself. What followed was an epic battle royale of mythological and supernatural proportions, with creatures of the night duking it out for supremacy. The roster for the Night Warriors included 10 playable characters and 2 non-playable bosses, all based on classic monster archetypes. You had everything from vampires to werewolves to mummies, with each character sporting their own unique look, feel, and backstory. The variety in character design was, and still is, one of the game's strongest points. The journey to get Darkstalkers to arcades wasn't as straightforward as you might think. The project started life in a rather unusual way, with 2 conflicting accounts of its origins. Producer Alex Jimenez originally wanted to create a fighting game based on universal monsters, you know, the likes of Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Mummy. But when the licensing deal with Universal fell through, Jimenez did what any creative mind would do. He came up with his own monsters. And get this, he says he did it in about an hour. Yep, that's how fast these iconic characters were born. On the other side of the development coin, Akira Yasuda, the game's art director, has a slightly different story. He claims that the idea for a monster-based fighting game actually came from a colleague named Akitomo, and the project gained momentum under the direction of Junichi Ono. Regardless of whose story you believe, one thing is clear: Darkstalkers was a team effort, and it came together as a perfect blend of classic horror and cutting-edge fighting mechanics. At the time, Yasuda and several team members were working on an unrelated side-scroller game based on a manga. However, the project wasn't following the manga storyline, and Yasuda realized it wouldn't be a success. So, like a true visionary, he scrapped it and repurposed the team for the Darkstalkers project. And thus, a new breed of fighters was born. One of the standout features of Darkstalkers is the sheer variety and personality of its characters. Capcom planner Haruo Murata joined the team later in development, but he quickly became responsible for designing the characters' personalities and stories. Murata wasn't just content with cranking out generic monsters, he wanted each character to have individuality and memorable traits. This decision added depth to the game's roster that wasn't often seen in fighting games of the time. Each designer on the team was assigned a character or group of characters to flesh out, and the backgrounds for the levels were left to their discretion. This led to a world that felt cohesive, yet wildly imaginative. The demon world, Earth, and all the other bizarre settings in between felt like places you wanted to explore, even though they were primarily just stages for the fighters to brawl in. Interestingly, it wasn't the Japanese development team that initially put much thought into the game's backstory or the lore of the demon world. That push came from the overseas staff, who were keen to flesh out the narrative and give the characters more substance. Some of the characters' names were even influenced by ideas that came from Capcom's international offices. The game's endings also stood out for their darker, more tragic tones. Unlike other fighting games where characters would walk off into the sunset with a smile after winning a tournament, Darkstalkers' characters often met grim or ambiguous fates. Whether it was a curse they couldn't escape or an insatiable hunger that drove them to madness, the endings of Darkstalkers were a refreshing change from the usual happily ever after fare. What's a monster fight without the right atmosphere, right? The sound and music of Darkstalkers played a huge role in setting the mood for each battle. Composer Hideki Okugawa was tasked with creating a soundtrack that reflected each character's unique vibe. But here's the catch, Okugawa didn't want the music to be all doom and gloom just because the fighters were monsters. If that were the case, the game would have felt too heavy, so instead, he threw in a variety of musical styles to match the often quirky personalities of the characters. The sound effects too were a massive undertaking. Takeshi Kitamura, who handled the sound design, wanted to capture an amusement park-like atmosphere with all the supernatural sounds you'd expect from a haunted house. But creating sound effects for monsters wasn't as simple as recording punches and kicks. This wasn't just a human versus human affair. You had characters with inhuman body parts, supernatural abilities, and attacks that required entirely new soundscapes. It took Kitamura several tries and likely a lot of headaches to get everything just right. And then there were the voice actors. The team spent days scouring anime and TV shows to find the perfect voices for their characters. When the final selections were made, the voice recordings were so emotionally powerful at times that the development team reportedly broke down in tears. That's some serious dedication. Darkstalkers, The Night Warriors first hit the Japanese arcades on July 12, 1994, under the title Vampire: The Night Warriors. While the game became an instant hit in Japan, it didn't quite achieve the same level of mainstream success in other regions, particularly in the West. Street Fighter II was still the king of the fighting game scene, and Darkstalkers developed more of a cult following than mainstream success outside of Japan. That said, the game's cult status only added to its allure. It was the hidden gem of fighting games, a quirky, spooky alternative for those who wanted something a little more fantastical. However, when the game was released internationally as Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors, it underwent some changes. Some character names were altered. Orbath became Rikuo, Galen became John Talbane, and Phobos was renamed Huitzil. The international versions also saw some cuts in dialogue and visual elements, such as the removal of borders around win quotes and the simplification of post-battle lines. As for the ports, the game was later released for the PlayStation in 1996, though it took longer than expected due to Capcom's inexperience with the hardware. The PlayStation version had some unique features, like new opening and ending themes, but also lacked certain elements found in the arcade version, most notably the ability to save high scores. Though Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors didn't quite hit the mainstream heights of Street Fighter II, it was still a massive success, especially in Japan. The game received critical acclaim for its stunning anime-style graphics, quirky characters, and fast-paced gameplay. It became a cult classic almost overnight, and for good reason. Video game magazines at the time were quick to praise the game. Video Games magazine gave it a stellar 9/10 rating, and even named it the second best game of 1994, right behind the juggernaut that was Super Metroid. The game also got recognition as the second best fighting game of the year, proving that Darkstalkers was a serious contender in the competitive arcade fighting scene. Reviewers loved the game's variety of characters and moves, which broke away from the more traditional fighting games of the era. While Street Fighter II was more grounded in martial arts, Darkstalkers reveled in the absurdity of having mythical creatures like vampires, mummies, and werewolves square off against each other. The addition of mid-air blocking, a faster gameplay pace, and the more fluid animations gave Darkstalkers a unique identity in an era when fighting games were all starting to look a bit samey. But despite its critical success, it struggled to capture the same level of international attention that Street Fighter II had. The reasons? Part of it was timing, with arcades starting to slowly decline in the West during the mid-90s. Another reason might be the game's odd mix of monsters and mythological creatures, which may have been a bit too niche for the mainstream audiences that had grown accustomed to more straightforward fighting games. But even if Darkstalkers didn't dominate the charts like some of its Capcom siblings, it gained a dedicated fanbase that would continue to sing its praises for years to come. Arcades were cool, but let's be honest, getting a chance to play Darkstalkers from the comfort of your living room was a game changer. In 1996, Capcom decided to port Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors to the PlayStation, bringing the monster brawls to a home console for the first time. However, the port had its fair share of issues, primarily due to Capcom's inexperience with Sony's relatively new hardware. The PlayStation version was missing some animation frames from the arcade original, and there was noticeable slowdown during some of the more hectic battles. This led to some mixed reviews of the port, with critics praising the game's core mechanics, but lamenting the technical shortcomings of the console version. Despite these flaws, the Darkstalkers home port was still highly regarded for its fun gameplay and unique character roster. Sure, it may not have been the smooth arcade experience fans were hoping for, but for those who didn't have access to an arcade, it was a fantastic way to experience the game without leaving the house. Interestingly, Capcom had originally planned to release a version of the game for the Sega 32X, a short-lived, much maligned add-on for the Sega Genesis, but that version was ultimately scrapped. It seems the 32X was destined to go the way of the dinosaurs before Darkstalkers could make its mark on the platform. The game would later be included in Vampire, Darkstalkers Collection, a compilation released exclusively in Japan for the PlayStation 2. This collection featured all 5 Darkstalkers arcade games and was a treat for fans who wanted to experience the series in its original form, with none of the technical hiccups found in earlier console ports. As mentioned earlier, Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors was a game that struck a chord with critics, if not mainstream audiences. GamePro praised the game's anime-style art and broad variety of characters, while other outlets commended its fast-paced gameplay and innovative mechanics, like mid-air blocking. The characters were perhaps the most beloved aspect of the game. From Dimitri's vampiric charm to Felicia's cat-like agility, each fighter had their own unique playstyle and personality, which set them apart from the more straightforward fighters seen in other games. However, not every review was glowing. Some critics felt that the gameplay lacked the depth of Street Fighter II and could be too easily mastered. Next Generation magazine argued that while Darkstalkers was technically impressive for a 2D fighter, it couldn't quite compete with the new wave of 3D fighters like Tekken and Virtua Fighter. The PlayStation version, in particular, received criticism for its lack of animation frames and slowdown, with Maximum magazine calling it a major disappointment due to its protracted development cycle and technical shortcomings. Yet, despite these critiques, Darkstalkers still carved out a niche for itself in the fighting game world. Its unique monster-filled roster and gorgeous animation earned it a place in the hearts of fighting game fans, and its influence could be seen in future Capcom fighters, particularly in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. The super meter mechanic introduced in Darkstalkers would become a staple of Capcom fighters, and the game's emphasis on fast, fluid animation would carry over into titles like Street Fighter Alpha and X-Men vs. Street Fighter. In 2007, Crave Online ranked Darkstalkers as one of the top 2D fighters of all time, calling it a game that paved the way for many great games after it. Eurogamer echoed this sentiment in 2013, stating that Darkstalkers had remained something of a cult favorite, thanks to its unique style and technical innovations. Indeed, for many fans, Darkstalkers was not just another fighting game, it was an introduction to a world of quirky, lovable, and downright terrifying characters that felt like they had stepped straight out of a Gothic horror novel. By the time Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors finished its run in arcades and on home consoles, it had cemented itself as a cult classic. While it never quite achieved the same level of mainstream success as Street Fighter II or Tekken, it found a loyal fanbase that still holds the game in high regard. Whether it was the quirky characters, the fast-paced gameplay, or the dark Gothic aesthetic, Darkstalkers brought something fresh to the table during a time when fighting games were becoming increasingly similar, and this was only the beginning. Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors laid the foundation for the Darkstalkers series, which would continue to evolve and refine its formula in the years to come. Characters like Morrigan, Dimitri, and Felicia would go on to become icons of the fighting game genre, and the world of Makai would become a playground for some of the most memorable and bizarre battles in video game history. So, while Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors may have flown under the radar for some players back in the day, it left an indelible mark on the fighting game landscape. Its legacy lives on, not just in the sequels and spin-offs it spawned, but in the countless players who still fondly remember their time battling it out in the dark, mysterious world of the Darkstalkers. Now that we've explored the origins of this monster mash, it's time to dive into its evolution. The story doesn't end here. Darkstalkers was just getting started. In 1995, Capcom released the sequel, Night Warriors: Darkstalkers Revenge, refining the formula and introducing even more chaos into the mix. Night Warriors: Darkstalkers Revenge, 1995. Refining the formula. After Darkstalkers, the Night Warriors grabbed the attention of fighting game fans. With its unique blend of gothic horror and fast-paced combat, Capcom knew they had something special. But in true Capcom fashion, they weren't about to rest on their laurels. Instead, they set out to refine the formula, adding new characters, new gameplay mechanics, and an extra layer of polish that would push the series even further. Enter Night Warriors: Darkstalkers Revenge, the sequel, that took the monstrous mayhem of the original and dialed it up to 11. Now we're going back to 1995, when the arcades were still buzzing with the sounds of coin slots and button mashing. Night Warriors hit the scene and immediately made waves, cementing the Darkstalkers series as a cult favorite in the fighting game world. So, what made Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge different from its predecessor? Well, Capcom wasn't content with just releasing the same game with a few tweaks. They made some significant changes to the gameplay and even introduced new characters to the roster, giving players even more reasons to step into the ring. One of the most notable changes was the introduction of chain combos. This mechanic allowed players to string together attacks with more fluidity, making the battles feel faster and more dynamic than ever before. It wasn't just about landing a single powerful punch anymore. Now you could combo your way to victory, chaining light, medium, and heavy attacks in quick succession. This gave the game a smoother, more modern feel and allowed players to get creative with their approach to combat. Another major addition was the ability to stock special gauges. In the original Darkstalkers, players could fill up a single gauge to unleash a special move, but in Night Warriors you could stock up on multiple gauges. This meant you could unleash devastating ES specials or go all out with X specials depending on how much power you'd accumulated. It added a new layer of strategy to the game, as players now had to decide when to burn their gauge or save it for a potentially game-changing move later on. Capcom also gave players the option to choose between two gameplay styles, normal mode and a mode with auto-blocking, which helped newer players defend against attacks without the need for precise timing. It was a small addition, but it made the game more accessible to casual players while keeping the core mechanics challenging for seasoned veterans. In true fighting game fashion, Night Warriors introduced two new characters to the Darkstalkers universe, Donovan Bane and Xianko. Both characters were Darkstalker hunters, out to rid the world of the monstrous creatures that populated the game. This was a direct nod to the game's Japanese title, Vampire Hunter, Darkstalkers Revenge, and it added a new narrative layer to the game's already eclectic roster. Donovan Bane was a half-human, half-vampire warrior who wielded a massive sword and a thirst for justice. His goal was to purify the world of dark forces, but he struggled with his own inner demons, torn between his human and vampire side. Donovan's unique playstyle revolved around his sword, known as Dialect, and his ability to summon spirits for powerful attack. His character added a new layer of depth to the game's lore, as he wasn't just fighting for power or survival, he was on a personal quest to conquer his own darkness. Then there's Xianko, a fan-favorite character who brought a whole new level of chaos to the battlefield. She and her twin sister were victims of a supernatural curse, and Xianko entered the tournament to save her sister's soul. With her distinctive outfit, complete with those oversized sleeves, and her unpredictable weapon-based attack, Xianko quickly became one of the most iconic characters in the series. Her design drew inspiration from traditional Chinese jiangshi, hopping vampires, which only added to the game's already colourful cast of mythological and supernatural creatures. To top it all off, Huitzil and Pyron, the boss characters from the first game, were now fully playable. This was a big deal for fans of the original, as it gave them the chance to finally take control of these powerful characters in regular matches. Pyron, the cosmic entity who sought to consume planets, brought his flame-based attacks to the table, while Huitzil, the ancient robot, was a master of laser beams and mechanical prowess. With these additions, Night Warriors boasted a roster that was both diverse and full of personality. Each character brought something unique to the table, whether it was a quirky design, an unusual fighting style, or a deeply personal backstory. When it came to the story, Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge wasn't looking to reinvent the wheel. In fact, much of the plot remained the same as the original Darkstalkers. The powerful alien overlord Pyron was still hell-bent on consuming Earth and adding it to his collection of devoured planets. The Darkstalkers, Earth's most fearsome supernatural beings, were once again called upon to defend the planet from total destruction. But the introduction of Donovan and Xianko added a new wrinkle to the story. These two characters weren't just fighting for survival or dominance, they had personal vendettas against the Darkstalkers and were determined to hunt them down. This created a sense of conflict within the game's universe, as some characters were fighting for power, while others were fighting to rid the world of evil. Each character still had their own unique endings, with many of them being just as dark and twisted as in the first game. If there's one thing Darkstalkers did well, it was leaning into the tragic and often grim fate of its characters. Donovan's internal struggle between light and dark, Xianko's mission to save her sister, and Pyron's quest for universal domination all added to the game's rich tapestry of supernatural drama. Now, let's talk development. Capcom was on a roll in the mid-90s, cranking out hit after hit in the fighting game world. After the success of the original Darkstalkers, they knew they had to step up their game for the sequel. The development team went all in on refining the mechanics and adding new layers of strategy, all while maintaining the fast-paced, visually stunning gameplay that fans had come to love. One thing Capcom did differently with Night Warriors was focus on visual and technical improvement. The first game had already been praised for its smooth animations and colorful sprite, but Night Warriors took things a step further. Each character had even more detailed animations, more frames, and more variety in their movesets, making the battles feel even more fluid and dynamic. When Capcom announced that the game would be ported to the Sega Saturn in 1996, fans were excited. The Saturn, while not as commercially successful as its competitors, was known for handling 2D games exceptionally well. Capcom made the decision to skip a PlayStation release for the sequel, focusing solely on the Saturn port. This move caused a bit of outrage among PlayStation owners, especially since the port of the original Darkstalkers for Sony's console had yet to be released. In an interview with Capcom representatives at the time, they explained that Night Warriors was essentially an upgrade of the original Darkstalkers. The sequel used twice as much memory as the original, which meant more animation frames, more patterns, and overall more polished. The Saturn, with its better handling of 2D sprites, was the perfect fit for a game like this. The Saturn version of Night Warriors included an appendix mode, which allowed players to customize the game's backgrounds, character colors, and even the background music. It was a small but appreciated feature that gave players more control over their experience. The Saturn port was well received, with critics praising it as one of the most arcade-perfect conversions of a fighting game at the time. As with any good Capcom franchise, Night Warriors wasn't limited to just the arcade or console. The game spawned a variety of tie-in media in Japan, from guidebooks to manga, and even a 4-part anime series titled Vampire Hunter: Darkstalkers Revenge. The anime, produced by Madhouse Studios, adapted the game's story and characters, adding yet another layer to the growing Darkstalkers lore. The anime was well received by fans of the series and helped to cement the Darkstalkers brand as more than just a fighting game. It was becoming a multimedia franchise. In addition to the anime, several manga series and art books were released in Japan, diving deeper into the world of Night Warriors and its characters. These books explored the backstory and personalities of the characters in greater detail, offering fans a more immersive experience beyond the game. So, how did Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge fare with critics and players? Well, the game was generally met with positive reviews, especially for its smooth animation and polished gameplay. Critics praised the game for taking what made the original great and making it even better. The introduction of chain combos, stocked special gauges, and the new characters were all seen as major improvements over the first game. The Sega Saturn port, in particular, was lauded as one of the best home conversions of an arcade fighting game. Publications like Game Informer, Video Games, and Sega Saturn Magazine all praised the game for its tight controls, beautiful animation, and unique characters. Some critics even went as far as to say that Night Warriors was one of Capcom's best fighters to date, rivaling even the likes of Street Fighter Alpha. However, not everyone was completely on board. Some felt that the game didn't introduce enough new content to fully justify itself as a sequel. Sure, the gameplay was more polished, but at its core, Night Warriors was still very similar to the original Darkstalkers. Critics who had grown accustomed to the more innovative mechanics of newer fighting games, like Virtua Fighter and Tekken, saw Night Warriors as a solid but safe entry in the 2D fighting game space. Despite some of the critiques, Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge managed to further establish the Darkstalkers series as a cult favorite. The game's characters, lore, and unique aesthetic continued to resonate with fans, and the improvements to gameplay mechanics helped refine the formula for future entries in the series. The game's legacy lived on through Darkstalkers Resurrection, a remastered compilation released in 2013 for PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade, which included both Night Warriors and Darkstalkers 3. This re-release brought the game to a whole new generation of players, proving that the Darkstalkers series still had plenty of fans eager to step into the ring with their favorite supernatural creatures. In the end, Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge was an important stepping stone for the series. It refined the mechanics, introduced memorable new characters, and continued to build the world of Darkstalkers into something truly unique. While it may not have broken entirely new ground, it solidified Darkstalkers as a beloved part of Capcom's fighting game legacy, and it paved the way for the even more ambitious games that would follow. Vampire Savior: The Lord of Vampire, 1997, a cult classic is born. By the time Vampire Savior: The Lord of Vampire, or Darkstalkers 3, as it's known in the West, was released in 1997, Capcom had already solidified the Darkstalkers franchise as a cult favorite. But with this third installment, the series truly came into its own, building upon the foundations laid by its predecessors, while introducing new mechanics, characters, and a story that dove deeper into the weird and wonderful world of Darkstalkers. If Night Warriors refined the formula, Vampire Savior took that formula, turned it upside down, and added a sprinkle of Gothic madness. One of the most significant changes introduced in Vampire Savior was the departure from the traditional round-based system found in most fighting games. Instead, Capcom gave us the damage gauge system, which shook up the entire way players approach matches. Rather than fighting in separate rounds where each player's life bar resets, Vampire Savior presented battles as one continuous round, with 2 life bars per character. When a life bar was depleted, the characters reset their positions, but the victorious fighter retained whatever life they had left. Think of it like Capcom's version of a marathon, where you've got to manage your health and strategy over the long haul, not just one short burst. This mechanic wasn't entirely new to fighting games. Killer Instinct had experimented with something similar. But Vampire Savior took it to a whole new level by combining it with the game's signature fast-paced, chaotic combat. Now, every hit mattered even more, and players had to think more strategically about when to go on the offensive and when to pull back and recover. That's right, Vampire Savior gave players the ability to recover portions of their health, but only if they could avoid taking damage for a short period of time. It added an extra layer of tension to every match, as players danced around each other, looking for the perfect moment to strike while also managing their health bars. The game also introduced the Dark Force system, which was a game changer literally. By burning a bar of their super meter, players could activate special abilities unique to each character for a limited time. Whether it was Morrigan's ability to summon a shadow double, or Bishaman's extra aggressive attacks, the Dark Force system added another layer of depth to an already complex game. It wasn't just about knowing your character's moves, it was about mastering when and how to unleash their full potential. For those playing on the PlayStation version, the Dark Force system came with 2 different modes, Dark Force Change and Dark Force Power. The former operated similarly to the arcade version, allowing players to activate their special abilities for a limited time. However, Dark Force Power was an enhanced mode that cost 2 bars of super meter, but packed an even bigger punch. It also came with a downside. Damage dealt in this mode couldn't be recovered. This risk-reward system made matches even more intense, as players had to decide whether the power boost was worth the potential loss of recoverable health. If there's one thing Darkstalkers is known for, it's its roster of quirky, memorable characters. While Vampire Savior saw the departure of Donovan, Quetzal, and Pyron, it introduced 4 brand new characters that brought their own unique flavors to the series. First up, we have Jeddah Doma, the main antagonist and final boss of the game. A resurrected noble from the demon world of Makai, Jeddah wasn't your typical take-over-the-world villain. Instead, he believed that the only way to save the crumbling demon realm was to recreate it, and to do that, he needed souls, lots of them. Jeddah's design, with his elegant, almost regal appearance, contrasted with his brutal, blood-based attacks. His personality and motivations made him one of the most compelling villains in the series, and his inclusion in Vampire Savior gave the game a deeper sense of narrative and stakes. Next, there's Lilith, who quickly became a fan favorite. She's a clone of Morrigan, created from a fragment of the succubus's soul, but with a much more playful and mischievous personality. While she shared some of Morrigan's moves, Lilith had enough unique characteristics to set her apart, and her story arc centering around her desire to become whole added a tragic twist to her character. Then there's QB, a literal human-sized bee with a hive mind who collects souls for her hive. That's right, Capcom decided to throw a giant soul-collecting bee into the mix, because why not? QB's fast, erratic movements and sting-based attacks made her a unique addition to the roster, and she stood out as one of the more bizarre but memorable characters in the game. And last but certainly not least, we have BB Hood aka Baby Bonnie Hood. Don't let her cute Little Red Riding Hood appearance fool you. BB Hood is a gun-toting, grenade-launching psychopath who hunts Darkstalkers for profit. Her design and moveset are an obvious parody of the innocent, fairy tale archetype, but Capcom turned it on its head by making her one of the most violent characters in the game. Her attacks range from machine guns to rocket launchers, and her creepy saccharine sweet persona hides a dark, dangerous core. She quickly became a favorite among players for her unpredictable playstyle and dark sense of humor. Of course, the returning cast members brought their A-game too. Fan favorites like Morrigan, Dimitri, Felicia, and Bishaman returned, with updated moves and animations to fit into the new mechanics. The combination of old favorites and fresh faces gave Vampire Savior one of the most diverse rosters in the fighting game world, and it was a big reason why the game resonated so strongly with fans. The plot of Vampire Savior was darker and more complex than its predecessors, largely thanks to Jeddah, who is arguably one of the most well-developed villains in the Darkstalkers series. After being resurrected following an untimely death, Jeddah returned to find the demon world of Makai in shambles. In his mind, the only way to save Makai was to destroy it and rebuild it from scratch, and to do that, he needed the souls of powerful beings. Using his powers, Jeddah created a dimension known as Magigen, a twisted reflection of the demon world, where he trapped the strongest Darkstalkers to harvest their souls for his grand plan. But, as you might expect, not everyone was keen on becoming fuel for Jeddah's vision. What followed was a battle for survival, as each fighter tried to escape the Magigen and put an end to Jeddah's madness. Unlike most fighting game bosses, Jeddah wasn't just out for power or destruction. His motivations were more nuanced. He genuinely believed he was saving the world, even if it meant sacrificing countless souls in the process. This added a layer of complexity to the game's narrative that set it apart from the typical good versus evil storylines in other fighting games. When Vampire Savior hit the arcades in 1997, it was clear that Capcom had taken everything they'd learned from the previous Darkstalkers games and refined it into something special. The game received widespread praise for its fast-paced gameplay, unique mechanics, and stellar character design. Critics lauded the addition of the damage gauge system and Dark Force system, which added a level of depth that was missing from many other fighting games of the time. The game was ported to the Sega Saturn in 1998. Though, much to the disappointment of Western fans, this version was exclusive to Japan. Thanks to the Saturn's 4 MB RAM cartridge, this port was one of the most faithful to the arcade experience, preserving the smooth animations and detailed sprites that made the game stand out. The PlayStation version followed later that same year, but it came with a few compromises due to the PlayStation's hardware limitations. Some animation frames were removed to keep the game running smoothly, and as a result, the PlayStation version didn't quite match the fluidity of the arcade or Saturn versions. Despite this, the PlayStation port was still well received, with players praising its accessibility and the inclusion of all 18 characters, including hidden ones like Shadow and Marionette. Vampire Savior also saw multiple re-releases and updates over the years, including Vampire Hunter 2 and Vampire Savior 2, which introduced new characters, tweaked the combo system, and made other minor adjustments. These versions were released exclusively in Japan, but they added even more depth to the Darkstalkers universe, further cementing its status as a cult classic. Despite being overshadowed by other fighting games of the time like Street Fighter Alpha and Marvel vs. Capcom, Vampire Savior found a loyal and passionate fanbase that continues to sing its praises to this day. Part of the game's enduring appeal lies in its unique blend of horror, humor, and creativity. The Darkstalkers series never took itself too seriously, and this allowed the developers to experiment with wild character designs, offbeat humor, and bizarre but compelling storylines. But beyond its quirky charm, Vampire Savior also holds up as one of the most mechanically deep and rewarding fighting games of its era. The combination of the damage gauge system, Dark Force system, and a diverse roster of characters with unique abilities made each match feel fresh and exciting. Whether you were a casual player drawn in by the colorful characters or a competitive player mastering combos and strategies, Vampire Savior had something for everyone. It's no wonder that the game has been included in several compilations and remasters over the years, from Darkstalkers Resurrection in 2013 to the more recent inclusion in the Capcom Fighting Collection. These re-releases have helped introduce the game to a new generation of players, ensuring that Vampire Savior continues to haunt the fighting game scene for years to come. Though it may not have the same mainstream recognition as some of Capcom's other fighting games, Vampire Savior, the Lord of Vampire holds a special place in the hearts of fighting game enthusiasts. Its unique mechanics, dark yet whimsical art style, and unforgettable characters make it a true gem in Capcom's vast library of arcade classics. The game may have been the final mainline entry in the Darkstalkers series, but its legacy lives on. Fans continue to clamor for a new installment, and characters like Morrigan, Felicia, and Jeddah still pop up in crossover titles and spin-offs, keeping the Darkstalkers flame alive. Whether Capcom ever decides to resurrect the series with a new entry remains to be seen, but one thing's for sure, Vampire Savior will always be remembered as a cult classic that pushed the boundaries of what a fighting game could be. Vampire Savior EX World of Darkness. After the incredible reception of Vampire Savior, the Lord of Vampire, Capcom wasn't content with just leaving things where they stood. They had carved out a niche with Darkstalkers that was both unique and beloved among fighting game fans, blending Gothic horror with the deep, fast-paced fighting mechanics that the genre is known for. But there was more to explore, more characters to bring in, and more ways to perfect the gameplay. Thus, Vampire Savior EX, often called the EX Edition, emerged as a refined, comprehensive version of the Darkstalkers experience, bringing together different elements from the game's Japanese updates, Vampire Hunter 2 and Vampire Savior 2. First released in 1998, Vampire Savior EX was the ultimate package, designed for both the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation. It aimed to bring together all the best parts of the Darkstalkers universe and deliver a final, definitive experience. This version combined not only the core Vampire Savior mechanics, but also updates and enhancements introduced in Vampire Hunter 2 and Vampire Savior 2, both of which had been released exclusively in Japan. As a result, Vampire Savior EX became a celebrated blend of new and familiar, making it a definitive collection for Darkstalkers fans worldwide. One of the key elements that made Vampire Savior EX stand out was its character roster. The original Vampire Savior had made some controversial cuts, omitting fan favorites like Donovan, Quetzal, and Pyron. However, the EX edition reintroduced these beloved characters, allowing fans to once again fight as the half-human, half-vampire warrior Donovan, unleash Quetzal's mechanical mayhem, or burn enemies to a crisp as Pyron, the cosmic overlord made of living flames. For longtime fans of the series, this was a massive deal. It meant that Vampire Savior EX wasn't just an updated version of Vampire Savior, it was a true celebration of the entire Darkstalkers series, bringing back characters that had been part of the journey since its early days. But reintroducing old characters was only part of the equation. Capcom didn't stop there. Vampire Savior EX also included several hidden characters, each of which added a unique twist to the gameplay. Shadow, for instance, brought a fresh take on character progression. When playing as Shadow, the player would take on the identity of the character they had just defeated. Imagine fighting against Morrigan, taking her down, and suddenly becoming Morrigan yourself for the next round. This gameplay mechanic kept matches unpredictable, as players had to constantly adapt to new movesets and strategies with each victory. Similarly, Marionette brought its own challenge to the table. In Marionette's mode, every match became a mirror match. If you were playing as Morrigan, your opponent would also be Morrigan. Every fight was a reflection of your own abilities, meaning that players had to rely entirely on their skill with that specific character to win. Mirror matches had always been a part of fighting games, but Vampire Savior EX turned them into a central mechanic, making every match a test of skill and adaptability. Marionette's inclusion was a perfect example of how Capcom loved experimenting with gameplay in the Darkstalkers series, always looking for ways to make each fight feel fresh and engaging. Another exciting addition to Vampire Savior EX was the inclusion of Obora Bishamon and Dark Talbane. These alternate versions of the cursed samurai Bishamon and the werewolf John Talbane brought new moves and abilities to their respective characters, allowing players to experiment with different playstyles while still keeping their favorite fighters. Obora Bishamon, for example, had a darker, more aggressive set of moves compared to the regular Bishamon, while Dark Talbane's ferocity and speed were cranked up even further, making him a devastating force in the right hands. It's important to note that Vampire Savior EX didn't just stop at character enhancements. The gameplay itself was also polished and refined to make battles even more strategic and satisfying. The damage gauge system, first introduced in Vampire Savior, remained a central part of the EX edition. This system did away with the traditional round-based format seen in most fighting games and replaced it with a single continuous round where each character had 2 life bars. When a character's life bar was depleted, they would reset their position on the battlefield, but their remaining health would carry over to the next exchange. This forced players to think about their long-term strategy, balancing aggressive attacks with careful defense to survive through the entire match. Every hit mattered more in this system because any damage you took would stick with you throughout the fight, making it crucial to manage your health effectively. The Dark Force system was another major gameplay element that returned in Vampire Savior EX. By using a portion of their super meter, players could activate unique abilities tied to their characters. These abilities often gave players the upper hand in battle, allowing them to perform more powerful attacks, move faster, or unleash devastating special moves. Morrigan, for example, could summon a shadow double of herself, while Jidar could use his blood-based powers to devastate his opponents. The Dark Force system added an additional layer of strategy to every match, as players had to decide when to activate their Dark Force ability and how to best use it to turn the tide of battle. In the PlayStation version of Vampire Savior EX, the Dark Force system was further refined into two modes: Dark Force Change and Dark Force Power. Dark Force Change works similarly to the arcade version, allowing players to activate their special abilities for a limited time. Dark Force Power, however, added an extra level of risk and reward. This mode required 2 full bars of super meter to activate, but it granted players the ability to deal non-recoverable damage to their opponents. The catch? Players would also take non-recoverable damage themselves. This system created a high-stakes dynamic where players had to decide whether the potential payoff of dealing massive damage was worth the risk of losing the ability to recover health. It was a brilliant mechanic that fit perfectly with Vampire Savior EX's fast-paced, aggressive combat. Customizability was another feature that made Vampire Savior EX stand out. Players could tweak various aspects of the game, from the background music to the colors of the characters and even the stages themselves. This level of customization allowed players to personalize their experience, giving them a sense of ownership over their battles. It's rare to see a fighting game that offers this much freedom to the player, and it was a statement to Capcom's commitment to creating an experience that was not only mechanically deep, but also aesthetically enjoyable. The story in Vampire Savior EX continued the dark and intricate narrative that had been introduced in Vampire Savior. At the heart of the story was Jidar Doma, the game's main antagonist. Jidar had been resurrected after his premature death and returned to the demon world of Makai to find it in ruins. His solution to this problem was drastic. He believed that the only way to save the demon world was to destroy it and recreate it in his own image. To do this, Jidar conjured a dimension known as Magigan, where he trapped the most powerful Darkstalkers to harvest their souls for his twisted plan. Each character in the game had their own reasons for fighting, whether it was to stop Jeddah, escape the Magigan, or fulfill their personal quests, but all of them were drawn into his grand vision of a new world. What made Jeddah such a compelling villain was the complexity of his motivations. He wasn't just a mindless force of destruction, he truly believed that he was doing the right thing, even if it meant sacrificing countless souls to achieve his goal. This added a layer of depth to the game's narrative, making it more than just a typical good versus evil storyline. Instead, Vampire Savior EX explored themes of power, sacrifice, and the lengths to which one will go to achieve their vision. The release and reception of Vampire Savior EX were marked by critical acclaim, particularly for its fluid animation, tight gameplay mechanics, and diverse cast of characters. The Sega Saturn version, in particular, was praised for its arcade-perfect translation, thanks to the system's 4MB RAM cartridge. This allowed the game to maintain the high frame rate and detailed sprites that had made the arcade version so visually stunning. Critics noted that the Saturn version was one of the best home conversions of a fighting game at the time, and it was a must-have for any fan of the genre. Over the years, Vampire Savior EX has remained a cult favorite among fighting game enthusiasts, particularly those who appreciate the depth and creativity of the Darkstalkers series. The game's inclusion in collections like Vampire Darkstalkers Collection and Darkstalkers Resurrection has kept it in the public eye, allowing new generations of players to experience the chaotic, Gothic world of Darkstalkers. And while fans continue to hope for a new entry in the series, Vampire Savior EX remains a shining example of how to refine and expand upon a beloved franchise while staying true to what made it great in the first place. It is a game that continues to haunt the fighting game landscape, reminding us of a time when Capcom dared to push the boundaries of what a fighting game could be. And even if we never see another Darkstalkers game, Vampire Savior EX will forever hold a special place in the hearts of fans who ventured into the shadows to fight for the fate of the demon world. Darkstalkers in the 2000s, ports, compilations, and the fight for relevance. The 2000s were a wild time for the gaming world, as consoles grew more powerful and the internet became a more significant part of the gaming experience. The fighting game genre underwent some major changes. However, amidst the rise of 3D fighters and the boom of online multiplayer, Capcom's Darkstalkers franchise found itself in a curious position. While not at the forefront like Street Fighter or Tekken, the Darkstalkers series still held a special place in the hearts of fans. The question was, how would Capcom keep the momentum going? Enter Vampire Chronicle for matching service, released in 2000 for the Sega Dreamcast as a mail-order game. That's right, Darkstalkers had gone from arcade cabinets and mainstream consoles to being a specialized niche offering available only through mail order. But don't let that fool you. This game was a hidden gem that kept the Darkstalkers flame burning brightly as the series entered a new decade. First, let's talk about what made Vampire Chronicle for matching service such a standout in the early 2000s. This was no mere rehash of earlier titles. Instead, Capcom essentially created the ultimate Darkstalkers crossover, combining elements from Vampire Hunter 2 and Vampire Savior 2 into one cohesive experience. While the game wasn't entirely new in terms of content, it allowed players to enjoy the best aspects of multiple Darkstalkers titles in one neat package. The key innovation of Vampire Chronicle was its fighting style system. Rather than limiting players to the mechanics of a single game, the developers gave you the option to choose between 4 distinct fighting styles: Vampire, Vampire Hunter, Vampire Savior, and Vampire Savior 2. Each style mirrored the mechanics of the corresponding game, allowing players to experience the series through whichever lens they preferred. Want to relive the fast-paced chaos of Vampire Savior? Go for it. Prefer the more deliberate strategic combat of Vampire Hunter? You could do that too. This was a bold move by Capcom, and an excellent way to appeal to the series' die-hard fans, who likely had their personal favorite iterations of Darkstalkers. What really made Vampire Chronicle stand out, though, was the introduction of online multiplayer via the Dreamcast's matching service. This feature allowed players to duke it out in versus mode over the internet, something that was still relatively new for fighting games at the time. For Darkstalkers fans, this was huge. No longer did they have to seek out local opponents or battle the CPU. Now they could challenge players from across Japan and prove who was the ultimate Darkstalker. This online mode was ahead of its time and foreshadowed the rise of online fighting game communities that would become a massive part of the genre in the years to come. While Vampire Chronicle stayed true to the original roster of characters from the Darkstalkers series, it also introduced a few new mechanics through its later iteration on the PlayStation Portable. In 2004, the game was ported to the PSP under the title Darkstalkers Chronicle: The Chaos Tower. This portable version maintained all the fighting styles and core gameplay mechanics, but added an exclusive single-player mode called Chaos Tower. Chaos Tower was a unique twist on the traditional Darkstalkers formula. It tasked players with climbing a series of increasingly difficult challenges, where each floor of the tower presented a new fight or objective to complete. Whether it was defeating a set number of opponents without losing a certain amount of health or surviving against particularly tough adversaries, the Chaos Tower mode kept players on their toes. It wasn't just about standard fighting, it introduced more varied gameplay objectives that made the single-player experience more engaging. In terms of characters, Vampire Chronicle didn't disappoint. The game featured all the iconic fighters from the series' history, including beloved favorites like Morrigan, the seductive succubus, whose shadow-based attacks and sly personality had made her an enduring symbol of the series. Dimitri, the regal vampire lord, returned to dominate with his bloodthirsty moves and rivalry with Morrigan. Felicia, the friendly Catwoman with claws of steel, continued to charm players with her agility and upbeat attitude. Newer characters from the later Darkstalkers games were also present, including Jida Doma, the ambitious noble from the demon world of Makai, whose blood-based attacks and twisted sense of justice made him one of the most compelling villains in the series. Lilith, Morrigan's playful and somewhat tragic clone, was also included, bringing her mix of innocence and mischief to the battlefield. Of course, fan favorites like BB Hood, the grenade-launching, psychopathic Darkstalker hunter disguised as Little Red Riding Hood, were also part of the roster, ensuring that players could enjoy the entire spectrum of Darkstalkers characters. From the fast-moving John Talbane, the series' resident werewolf, to the terrifyingly powerful Pyron, the entire cast was as colourful and bizarre as ever. One of the best features of Vampire Chronicle was how it allowed players to select their preferred fighting style based on the previous Darkstalkers games. This wasn't just a gimmick, it fundamentally changed how each character played. Choosing the vampire fighting style, for instance, brought you back to the mechanics of the very first game, complete with slower-paced, more methodical combat. On the other hand, selecting the Vampire Savior style introduced the frenetic pace and combo-heavy action that had defined the third installment in the series. What's particularly interesting is how Capcom balanced all these different systems. With 4 distinct fighting styles in the game, the challenge was ensuring that no one style dominated the others. Yet, the developers managed to strike a balance that allowed players to experiment with different strategies and approaches without feeling disadvantaged. This freedom gave the game a dynamic quality, where no two matches felt the same. Whether you were mastering chain combos in Vampire Savior mode or relying on precise single-hit techniques from Vampire Hunter, the game felt fresh no matter how many hours you sank into it. The Chaos Tower mode on the PSP only added to this versatility. Rather than simply throwing players into one-on-one battles, the tower's challenges pushed players to think differently about their strategies. For instance, in one challenge, you might need to avoid taking damage while dispatching multiple opponents. In another, you might need to land a specific type of move to win. This variety made Chaos Tower mode more than just an extended fight. It was an ever-evolving puzzle that demanded both skill and adaptability. Vampire Chronicle for matching service and its PSP counterpart, Darkstalkers Chronicle, the Chaos Tower, played a crucial role in keeping the Darkstalkers series alive in the 2000s. Even though the franchise didn't see a brand new entry during this period, these releases gave fans an opportunity to revisit the series in a new light, with updated mechanics and online multiplayer that extended the game's life far beyond its initial arcade roots. By the time the game hit the PSP, Capcom had created something that appealed not only to longtime fans, but also to a new generation of players. Portable gaming was at its peak, and the PSP allowed Darkstalkers to reach an entirely different audience. With the ability to take the game on the go and battle it out in the Chaos Tower, Darkstalkers Chronicle was a perfect fit for the handheld console era. Though the 2000s didn't bring us a brand new Darkstalkers title, these iterations helped keep the series relevant. The fact that Vampire Chronicle offered both casual fun and a deep technical fighting system ensured that it would have staying power, even as newer fighting games began to take the spotlight. Capcom's decision to blend the best elements from each of the Darkstalkers games into one package was a brilliant move that kept the spirit of the series alive even as the franchise took a bit of a backseat to other titles. Ultimately, Vampire Chronicle for matching service and its Chaos Tower counterpart on PSP represented a bridge between the past and the future for the Darkstalkers franchise. While it wasn't a revolutionary new entry, it did exactly what was needed. It preserved the essence of Darkstalkers, allowed fans to revisit the best parts of the series, and introduced the game to new audiences through updated technology like online play and portable gaming. In a decade where fighting games were evolving rapidly, Darkstalkers still managed to hold on to its distinct style and charm. Crossover appearances, Darkstalkers characters in other games. The Darkstalkers franchise, with its unique roster of Gothic-inspired characters and fast-paced fighting mechanics, has always been a standout in Capcom's library. Although the series didn't enjoy the same sustained success as other Capcom giants like Street Fighter, the characters of Darkstalkers quickly gained a cult following. Capcom capitalized on this popularity by including these characters in various crossover and spin-off titles, ensuring that Darkstalkers fans had plenty of opportunities to see their favorite fighters in action, even as the main series took a back seat. The Darkstalkers characters soon began appearing in numerous other games, further expanding their influence and legacy. The original Darkstalkers, the Night Warriors, released in 1994 for arcades and later ported to the PlayStation, was the birthplace of iconic characters like Morrigan, Dimitri, and Felicia. These characters, with their distinct personalities and movesets, made an immediate impact and paved the way for future crossover appearances. The follow-up title, Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge, 1995, introduced new characters such as Donovan Bane and Xian Ko, expanding the cast and creating a richer world for fans to dive into. As the series grew with subsequent releases like Vampire Hunter 2 Darkstalkers Revenge, 1997, and Vampire Savior, The Lord of Vampire, 1997, Capcom built a deep roster of characters. Notable additions like Lilith, BB Hood, and Jida further solidified the franchise's place in the fighting game pantheon. By the late 90s, the Darkstalkers series had amassed a large enough following that Capcom began including these characters in other games. This strategy allowed them to live on in a variety of formats, including major crossover fighting games. Morrigan, arguably the face of the franchise, was one of the first characters to branch out, appearing in games like Capcom vs SNK Millennium Fight 2000 and Marvel vs Capcom 2. These crossover titles not only gave Darkstalkers fans more ways to enjoy their favorite characters, but also introduced Morrigan and her fellow fighters to a broader audience. In addition to crossover fighting games, Capcom ensured that the Darkstalkers characters stayed in the spotlight through a variety of compilations and re-releases. In 2005, Vampire Darkstalkers Collection was released for the PlayStation 2, bundling together several of the series' most beloved titles, including Vampire Savior and its updates, Vampire Savior 2 and Vampire Hunter 2. This collection provided fans with the ultimate way to relive the franchise, while also introducing newer players to the series. Nearly a decade later, Capcom released Darkstalkers Resurrection in 2013 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. This compilation featured updated versions of Night Warriors and Vampire Savior, giving the series a fresh look with enhanced graphics and online multiplayer functionality. These re-releases helped keep the Darkstalkers franchise alive, even as fans awaited a potential new entry. While Morrigan became a staple of Capcom's crossover fighting games, other characters from Darkstalkers began popping up in more niche titles. For instance, Vampire Chronicles for Matching Service, released in 2000 for the Sega Dreamcast, brought together different gameplay styles from various Darkstalkers titles. This version allowed players to select their favorite fighting styles, such as Vampire or Vampire Savior, and even featured online play, an innovative feature for the time. While this Dreamcast version remained a Japan-exclusive release, it helped maintain the series' momentum. A few years later, Vampire Chronicle was ported to the PlayStation Portable as Darkstalkers Chronicle: The Chaos Tower, 2004. This version included all the features from the Dreamcast original but replaced the online multiplayer with a single-player Chaos Tower mode, where players could battle through increasingly difficult stages. It was a significant release, especially for fans of portable gaming, and introduced a new generation to the Darkstalkers universe. In addition to these major releases, Darkstalkers characters also found their way into mobile games during the early 2000s. Titles like Osambo Morrigan, 2001, Ulbath's Wild River, 2002, and Sasquatch Go Home, 2002, took characters from the Darkstalkers roster and placed them in entirely different genres. For instance, Osambo Morrigan featured the franchise's iconic succubus in a mobile adventure, while Ulbath's Wild River put the underwater fighter Rikuo in the spotlight. Although these games didn't reach the same level of success as the main series, they helped keep Darkstalkers characters relevant during a time when mobile gaming was still in its infancy. Another notable mobile game was Lei Lei's Magical Hammer, 2005, which starred Lei Lei, better known as Xianko in the West. This mobile title took a different approach, offering puzzle-like gameplay that utilized Lei Lei's magical abilities in creative ways. Similarly, Felicia's Magical Step, 2006, gave Felicia, the Catwoman from the series, a starring role in her own mobile platformer. These games were fun diversions that helped expand the world of Darkstalkers, even if they didn't capture the full attention of hardcore fighting game fans. Later, in 2009, Capcom would even take the Darkstalkers franchise into the world of Pachislo, a type of Japanese slot machine, with the simply titled Vampire. This release was yet another example of how Capcom kept the series alive in unexpected ways. As the 2000s wore on, Darkstalkers characters became increasingly well known for their crossover appearances, thanks to titles like Marvel vs. Capcom and Capcom vs. SNK Morrigan's place as one of Capcom's most iconic characters was cemented, and other Darkstalkers fighters like Felicia, Jeddah, and Dimitri continued to appear in various Capcom crossover games. Even if a full-fledged new entry in the series seemed unlikely, Darkstalkers fans could always count on seeing their favorite characters pop up in other places, whether it was in fighting games, mobile titles, or even slot machines. Capcom's ability to keep Darkstalkers relevant throughout the years is a statement to the lasting appeal of its unique cast of characters. Through these crossover appearances, Darkstalkers fans have been able to enjoy their favorite fighters in new and exciting contexts, proving that while the series may have taken a step back, its characters will always be a part of the Capcom universe. Darkstalkers Resurrection 2013. Nostalgia meets new audiences. By the time 2013 rolled around, it had been over a decade since fans had seen a new Darkstalkers game. Yet, the thirst for Gothic fighters, quirky characters, and chaotic action hadn't waned. The Darkstalkers franchise had developed a cult following, with Morrigan, Dimitri, Felicia, and the rest of the cast maintaining their relevance through crossover appearances and cameos in other Capcom games. But what fans really wanted was to dive back into the original Darkstalkers titles that started it all. Enter Darkstalkers Resurrection, Capcom's answer to the prayers of longtime fans, and a chance for newcomers to experience the magic for the first time. Released in March 2013, Darkstalkers Resurrection, known as Vampire Resurrection in Japan, was a downloadable compilation of two of the most iconic titles in the series: Night Warriors, Darkstalkers Revenge, 1995, and Darkstalkers 3, 1997. Developed by Iron Galaxy Studios and published by Capcom, this re-release wasn't just a simple port, it was designed to bring Darkstalkers into the modern age, with e-visuals, online multiplayer, and a wealth of other enhancements. While it celebrated the franchise's legacy, it also introduced a whole new generation to the world of Darkstalkers. At its core, Darkstalkers Resurrection remained true to the original gameplay of the Darkstalkers series. If you are a fan of the fast-paced, combo-heavy action that the franchise was known for, then this was the game for you. The compilation included both Night Warriors, Darkstalkers Revenge, and Darkstalkers 3, allowing players to experience two of the most beloved titles from the series. And while the games retained their original mechanics, there were plenty of modern updates that made them feel fresh. One of the biggest additions was online multiplayer, powered by the GGPO netcode, a feature that fighting game fans everywhere celebrated. Known for its smooth online gameplay, GGPO ensured that matches had minimal lag, making those intense battles between Morrigan and Felicia feel just as smooth online as they would in an arcade setting. Players could also engage in ranked matches, player matches, and even online tournaments, adding a competitive edge to the experience. Darkstalkers Resurrection also introduced several other features designed to enhance the overall gameplay experience. For example, the inclusion of an 8-player lobby system allowed friends to gather online, spectate matches, and take turns battling it out. This was perfect for players who wanted to enjoy the game in a more social setting, recreating the feel of an old-school arcade where players lined up to face off. The replay sharing feature allowed players to upload their best fights to YouTube, showing off their skills to the world and letting others learn from their strategies. For newer players or those unfamiliar with the Darkstalkers mechanics, Iron Galaxy Studios went the extra mile by including a comprehensive tutorial mode. This mode provided in-depth tips on how to master each character's moveset, combo strings, and strategies. It was the perfect entry point for players who had never experienced the madness of Darkstalkers before. Additionally, the game featured a range of visual filters, including HD filtering, allowing players to switch between modern graphics and the original retro visuals, depending on their preference. One of the more fun features was the vault system, where players earned points by completing in-game challenges. These points could be used to unlock concept art, custom artwork by artists like Stanley, Artgum Lau, and other cool bonuses. It was a great way to keep players engaged and rewarded for their efforts, adding a layer of depth and replayability beyond just the core fighting gameplay. The development of Darkstalkers Resurrection was led by Iron Galaxy Studios, a team that had already proven its chops with re-releases of classic Capcom fighting games, including Street Fighter III Third Strike, Online Edition, and Marvel vs. Capcom Origins. By the time the project was announced at New York Comic Con in 2012, Darkstalkers fans were eager for anything new from the series, and Capcom saw this as an opportunity to capitalize on the nostalgia while testing the waters for potential future titles. Yoshinori Ono, the then executive producer at Capcom, was the one who broke the news during Capcom's Street Fighter 25th anniversary panel. As soon as the words left his mouth, the crowd erupted with excitement. Finally, the return of Darkstalkers. It was revealed that the project had been in development for about a year before its announcement, showing how much care and time Capcom had invested in making sure the compilation was more than just a simple re-release. There was a bit of a struggle during the planning phase. The team agonized over whether to release Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge or Darkstalkers 3. Both games had their respective fanbases, and the community was divided on which title deserved the HD treatment. In the end, Capcom decided to please everyone by bundling both games into one package. This was a win-win for fans, allowing them to experience the best of both worlds literally. Iron Galaxy Studios worked hard to ensure that the core gameplay remained true to the original arcade versions. There were no balance changes, no alterations to priority systems, and no new moves added. The goal was to preserve the authenticity of the Darkstalkers experience, making players feel like they were stepping back into the arcades of the 90s, but with the convenience of modern consoles and online play. This dedication to keeping the game faithful to its roots was one of the reasons why Darkstalkers Resurrection resonated so well with longtime fans. Darkstalkers Resurrection launched between March 12th and March 14th, 2013, across North America, Europe, and Japan, on both the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade. The game was met with positive reviews almost universally, with critics praising its faithful recreation of the original games, its smooth online multiplayer, and the added features that made it more accessible to modern audiences. One aspect of the game that received particular praise was the use of GGPO netcode. Fighting game fans know that lag can be a killer in online matches, and GGPO was known for minimizing latency issues. The inclusion of this netcode, along with features like ping display and region matching, made the online experience feel seamless and competitive. The additional viewing options and HD filters also got a nod from critics, as they allowed players to tailor the visual experience to their liking, whether they preferred a nostalgic retro vibe or a crisper, more modern look. However, despite the glowing reviews, Darkstalkers Resurrection faced a tough time in the market. While it did appear in digital bestseller lists, Capcom's then senior vice president Christian Svensson revealed that it ultimately fell short of sales expectations. Although it found success within the fanbase, it struggled to break into the broader gaming market, where newer fighting games like Street Fighter IV and Mortal Kombat dominated the landscape. Svensson's remarks about the game's commercial performance were a bit of a reality check for fans who had hoped that Darkstalkers Resurrection might lead to a full-fledged new entry in the series. Nevertheless, the game's release wasn't without its fun tie-ins. In Japan, 2 companion books were launched on the same day as the game: the Vampire Resurrection official anthology comic and the art book Vampire Artworks. These publications featured illustrations and works from some of Capcom's most renowned artists and further celebrated the legacy of the Darkstalkers series. For die-hard fans, these extras were the cherry on top, adding even more value to an already nostalgia-packed release. While Darkstalkers Resurrection may not have been a blockbuster hit in terms of sales, its impact on the Darkstalkers community and on fighting game fans at large cannot be understated. For longtime players, it was a chance to relive the glory days of arcade fighting, while for newcomers, it served as a perfect entry point into one of Capcom's most beloved yet underappreciated franchises. For those who grew up with the series, Darkstalkers Resurrection was a beautiful reminder of the franchise's charm. The smooth, fast-paced combat, quirky characters, and Gothic aesthetic brought back waves of nostalgia, and the game's faithful recreation of the original arcade titles ensured that nothing was lost in translation. Players could once again feel the thrill of pulling off a perfectly timed combo as Morrigan, or watching the screen light up with Jadar's brutal finishes. For new players, the game served as a crash course in the world of Darkstalkers. With its detailed tutorial mode, newcomers could learn the ropes and slowly master the mechanics that had made the series so beloved. Whether they were stepping into the shoes of Dimitri for the first time, or discovering the strategic depth of Night Warriors, these new players were treated to a classic fighting game experience that still felt relevant in 2013. The vault system and unlockables also played a role in keeping players engaged. The ability to earn points and unlock artwork, concept designs, and videos added a layer of progression that made each victory feel rewarding. And for those who were interested in the lore and artistic side of Darkstalkers, these extras offered a deeper glimpse into the creative process behind the series. Though Darkstalkers Resurrection didn't spark the full revival that many fans were hoping for, it did succeed in bringing the series back into the spotlight, if only for a time. It served as a reminder of what made the franchise so special in the first place: the characters, the combat, and the unique atmosphere that only Darkstalkers could offer. And while there's still no word on a new Darkstalkers game, the release of Darkstalkers Resurrection ensured that the series would not be forgotten. The art and design of Darkstalkers, a Gothic masterpiece. If there's one thing that has set the Darkstalkers series apart from every other fighting game franchise, it's the art and design. When we talk about Darkstalkers' incredible art direction, we can't ignore the incredible talent that Capcom brought on board to bring the series to life. Two names that often come up in conversations about Capcom's most iconic art and design are Akiman and Bengus, also known as CRMK. These two played a major role in shaping the look and feel of Darkstalkers, setting the bar incredibly high for fighting games of the 1990s. Akimen, who also worked on Street Fighter and Gundam series, was instrumental in creating some of the key artwork and character designs in the early stages of Darkstalkers. Akimen's style blends sleek, dynamic poses with detailed, exaggerated features, and that came through especially in the promotional artwork for the series. The promotional art had an almost anime-like quality to it, but with darker, more sinister undertones. Characters like Morrigan and Dimitri felt like they had stepped out of a dark fantasy, with a level of detail that gave them both personality and presence even before they leapt into battle. Bengus, on the other hand, was heavily involved in the in-game character illustrations, as well as much of the artwork used for manuals and game intros. Known for his signature style of bold lines and exaggerated expressions, Bengus captured the wild, sometimes humorous, yet always intense spirit of the Darkstalkers characters. His work on the character select screens and victory poses gave players a glimpse of just how varied and dynamic each fighter could be. Characters like Lord Raptor and Felicia were perfect examples of his style. Vibrant, over-the-top designs that were brimming with personality. Bengus had a knack for making each character feel like they were on the edge of bursting out of the screen. One of the standout aspects of Darkstalkers' design is how Capcom managed to blend humor and horror so seamlessly. For example, Morrigan Ainsland is designed as a sultry succubus, her green hair and bat wings giving her a distinct demonic allure. Yet, even with her seductive looks, there's a playful energy to her design that's pure Darkstalkers. This contrast between gothic horror and cartoonish exaggeration is at the heart of the game's appeal. Dmitri Maximoff, the brooding vampire lord, is another example. His regal attire and towering stature scream classic horror, but his dramatic, flamboyant personality keeps things fun rather than overly grim. This playful gothic aesthetic is what makes the art so iconic, and it's no wonder that these characters have become so recognizable, even outside of the series. At its core, Darkstalkers is a game about monsters, but Capcom didn't just create monsters. They created monsters with flair, style, and above all, personality. Each fighter in the series is inspired by classic monster archetypes, but they've been given such creative twists that they feel wholly original. The design team, led by Bengus and Akimen, made sure that no two characters felt alike, and that extended beyond just their looks. Take Felicia, for instance. She's a Catwoman, a staple of fantasy and sci-fi, but instead of going the typical seductive feline route, Felicia's design exudes a bubbly, almost naive energy. Her bright blue hair, large paws, and fur-covered limbs make her instantly recognizable, and she's as adorable as she is fierce. She's not just another pretty face. Her design tells a story of innocence and determination, making her one of the standout characters in the series. Felicia's movements, designed to mimic a cat's agility, give her a unique flow in battle. Every slash of her claws or flip in the air feels perfectly in sync with her character. Then there's Lord Raptor, the undead heavy metal rocker. If you're going to have a zombie in a fighting game, why not make him a guitar-shredding maniac with a mohawk and a chainsaw hidden in his ribcage? His design is so outlandish, so metal, that you can't help but be drawn to him. His character animation was just as wild. When Lord Raptor wins a match, he doesn't just pose, he breaks into a full-on rock performance, complete with headbanging and guitar riffs. This blend of rock and roll and zombie horror is classic Darkstalkers, fun, irreverent, and undeniably cool. Anakaris, the towering Egyptian mummy, stands out as one of the most visually striking characters in the game. His design is a nod to the classic horror film The Mummy, but with an over-the-top twist. He's massive, with bandages that stretch and whip around the screen, giving him an intimidating presence in battle. Yet despite his terrifying size, his animations are often quirky and humorous, like when he pulls his bandages back to reveal a tiny version of himself hidden within. That level of attention to detail in character design is something that Capcom nailed with Darkstalkers. Each fighter feels like they've been carefully crafted, not just as a combatant, but as a fully realized character with their own personality quirks and visual charm. While the characters are undoubtedly the stars of the show, the environments in Darkstalkers are equally impressive. The art team at Capcom went above and beyond to create stages that didn't just serve as backdrops, but actively contributed to the game's gothic atmosphere. Every location felt alive, as if the stage itself was a character in the fight. Much of the environmental art was designed by Junichi Ono, who worked closely with the rest of the team to craft environments that felt immersive and dynamic. One of the standout stages is Fetus of God, Jida's lair in Vampire Savior. This stage is a perfect example of how far Capcom was willing to push the envelope when it came to environmental design. Set inside a massive, grotesque fetus suspended in some kind of eerie, bioorganic cathedral, this stage oozes horror. The pulsating walls, strange organic forms, and unsettling sound effects make it one of the most memorable and bizarre stages in any fighting game. It's a perfect fit for Jida, the enigmatic and twisted villain of Vampire Savior, and it gives players a sense of just how otherworldly and creepy the Darkstalkers universe can get. Another memorable stage is Zabel's Graveyard, the home turf of Lord Raptor. The design here leans heavily into horror punk aesthetics, with crumbling tombstones, flickering neon lights, and graffiti-covered walls. It's the kind of place where you'd expect a zombie rock star to hang out. The graveyard itself feels alive, with skeletons emerging from the ground and strange creatures lurking in the shadows. It's the perfect setting for a chaotic, high-energy battle, and it showcases the art team's ability to blend humor and horror in the same space. Even the simpler stages like Morrigan's Clock Tower have an incredible sense of atmosphere. The clock tower looms over the battlefield, with gears turning and the sky a dark, ominous purple. There's a sense of grandeur to the setting, and it perfectly matches Morrigan's regal, yet dangerous demeanor. The environmental art in Darkstalkers isn't just about looking cool, it's about creating a mood. Every stage feels like a place where these supernatural beings would clash, whether it's in a creepy abandoned mansion or a haunted forest under the full moon. Bringing all of this to life wasn't an easy task. Capcom's design team faced a number of challenges in creating a world that was both visually stunning and full of personality. The team drew inspiration from a wide range of sources, from classic Universal monster films to Japanese folklore, and they worked hard to blend these influences into something cohesive. The design process for Darkstalkers involved close collaboration between the character designers, animators, and background artists. According to Haruo Murata, one of the lead planners on the game, the team wanted to make sure that each character felt distinct, not just in terms of gameplay, but in terms of their place within the Darkstalkers world. Characters like Xianko, aka inspired by the Chinese Jiangxi, and Sasquatch, a Yeti-like creature pulled from international myths and legends, which helped give the roster a global, otherworldly feel. The animation team, led by Hideki Itsuno, also deserves a lot of credit for the smooth, fluid movement in the game. Darkstalkers was one of the first fighting games to use 16-bit color animation sprites, and this gave the characters a level of detail and smoothness that was rare at the time. Each character's animations were packed with personality, from the way Victor, the Frankenstein's monster, would charge across the screen to the way Morrigan's wings would flutter as she hovered in midair. The team went through painstaking work to ensure that every character moved in a way that matched their design, and it paid off in spades. The art and design of Darkstalkers stand as one of the most iconic aspects of the franchise, elevating it from a simple fighting game into a full-blown Gothic masterpiece. Capcom's talented team of artists and designers, from Bengus to Akiman, poured their hearts into creating a world that was both dark and playful, eerie yet charming. Each character feels like a fully realized being, with their own quirks, personalities, and detailed visual flourishes. The stages, too, are more than just battlegrounds. They're immersive environments that draw players deeper into the Darkstalkers universe. Even after all these years, the art and design of Darkstalkers continue to inspire, with characters like Morrigan and Felicia becoming icons not just within Capcom's library, but within the world of gaming as a whole. The franchise's bold artistic vision remains one of the main reasons why it has endured in the hearts of fans, and why it continues to be remembered as one of Capcom's greatest artistic achievements. The Darkstalkers' legacy, influence on modern fighting games. Released during the 90s, a time when Street Fighter was Capcom's golden child, and Mortal Kombat was captivating audiences with its brutal fatalities, Darkstalkers found itself in the shadow of these giants. It didn't help that Darkstalkers' gothic horror and anime-inspired design made it a bit niche, even by fighting game standards. The monsters, the quirky mechanics, and the offbeat art style were all elements that made it stand out, but it wasn't enough to topple the heavyweights in the arcades. However, what Darkstalkers may have lacked in commercial dominance, it made up for in innovation. Capcom used this series as a testing ground for new mechanics that would later become staples in many modern fighting games. Things like chain combos, air blocking, and EX moves were first introduced in Darkstalkers, before being adopted by Street Fighter Alpha and Marvel vs. Capcom. These mechanics transformed the way fighting games were played, pushing the genre to evolve beyond the simple punch-and-kick mechanics of earlier titles. In many ways, Darkstalkers was the blueprint for what modern fighting games would become. One of the most groundbreaking contributions of Darkstalkers was the introduction of chain combos. Prior to this, most fighting games relied on single-hit attacks or basic combinations that could only string a few moves together. Darkstalkers revolutionized this by allowing players to link light, medium, and heavy attacks in a fluid sequence, creating longer, more satisfying combos. This dialer combo system made fights faster paced and more aggressive, influencing games like Killer Instinct and later entries in the Street Fighter series. Another significant innovation was the EX move system, introduced in Night Warriors, Darkstalkers Revenge. This mechanic allowed players to burn a portion of their special gauge to perform enhanced versions of their special moves, adding another layer of strategy to the combat. The idea of a special meter that could be used for either super moves or enhanced specials later became a staple in Street Fighter III and Street Fighter IV, solidifying its place in the genre. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find a modern fighter that doesn't have some variation of the EX mechanic. Another innovation from Darkstalkers was the air blocking system, which gave players the ability to block attacks even while airborne. Before this, jumping in fighting games was mostly an offensive maneuver. If you were in the air, you were vulnerable to counterattacks, and it was a risky move to leap toward your opponent. Darkstalkers changed this by allowing players to defend themselves while in the air, opening up new tactical possibilities. Air blocking added a vertical dimension to the strategy. Players could now safely jump in, bait attacks, or retreat to the air without fear of punishment. This mechanic was so impactful that it found its way into other Capcom titles like Marvel vs. Capcom and Street Fighter Alpha, and it has since become a standard feature in many modern fighting games. It allowed for more aggressive, fast-paced gameplay and made aerial combat a key aspect of fighting game strategy. Let's talk about character design, because if Darkstalkers did anything right, it was creating a roster of fighters that were not only visually striking, but also mechanically distinct. Each character in Darkstalkers is based on a classic horror archetype: vampires, werewolves, mummies, zombies, but with a unique twist. These designs were so ahead of their time that they influenced the character creation in future Capcom titles and even outside of Capcom's catalog. Morrigan, the iconic succubus, became one of the most recognizable fighting game characters of all time. Her fluid animation, seductive charm, and complex moveset made her a fan favorite and a mainstay in crossover games like Marvel vs. Capcom. Her design also influenced the creation of characters like Street Fighter's Jury, who shares a similarly dark, seductive style combined with acrobatic fighting moves. Felicia, the cheerful Catwoman, is another example of how Darkstalkers blended horror with playful elements. Her fast, agile playstyle paved the way for characters in future games that relied on speed and agility over brute strength. You can see shades of Felicia in characters like BlazBlue's Taukaka and even Tekken's Lucky Chloe. Darkstalkers proved that not all horror-inspired characters had to be grim or monstrous. They could be cute, playful, and deadly at the same time. Then there's Jida, the villainous, blood-manipulating noble from Vampire Savior. His regal, twisted design influenced later bosses in Capcom games, especially with his unique movement and ability to control space. His influence is evident in characters like Urien from Street Fighter III, and even Gil, both of whom have similar godlike personas and intricate space-controlling movesets. Jida's ability to create traps and control the battlefield through his blood powers made him a fascinating and complex character, showcasing Darkstalkers' ability to push the envelope in terms of character design. The animation and sprite work in Darkstalkers were absolutely groundbreaking for their time. Capcom's 2D sprite work had always been top tier, but with Darkstalkers, they took it to a whole new level. Each character was meticulously animated, with fluid movement that gave them personality, both in and out of combat. From the way Morrigan's wings flutter as she hovers in midair, to the way Anakaris unravels and reforms his body, every character felt alive. This attention to detail in animation set a gold standard for 2D fighting games that would influence titles for years to come. Games like The King of Fighters and BlazBlue adopted a similar approach to character animation, ensuring that each fighter had a distinct personality and playstyle that was reflected in their movements. Even modern games that have transitioned to 3D, like Guilty Gear Strive and Dragon Ball FighterZ, owe a lot to the fluid, character-driven animations that Darkstalkers pioneered. Another significant influence of Darkstalkers was its contribution to Capcom's later crossover titles. Without the success of Darkstalkers' quirky roster and unique mechanics, games like Marvel vs. Capcom might not have been as bold in their character designs or mechanics. Morrigan, Felicia, and others became mainstays in crossover games, blending effortlessly into the zaniness of the Marvel Universe. In a way, Darkstalkers' willingness to embrace the weird and the wild gave Capcom the confidence to experiment with crossover titles, bringing characters from different universes together in one chaotic, exciting package. The success of these crossover games cemented Capcom's dominance in the fighting game genre, and much of that success can be traced back to the experimental nature of Darkstalkers. So, while Darkstalkers may not have achieved the same commercial success as Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, its influence on the fighting game genre is undeniable. From pioneering new mechanics like chain combos, EX moves, and air blocking to setting a high bar for character design and animation, Darkstalkers pushed the genre forward in ways that are still felt today. Modern fighting games like BlazBlue, Guilty Gear, and Skullgirls all owe a debt to Darkstalkers. Even the Street Fighter series, Capcom's flagship fighting franchise, took many cues from the innovations that Darkstalkers introduced. The game's influence can also be seen in the way modern fighters approach storytelling and character lore, with each character being treated as more than just a fighter, but as a fully fleshed out personality with a place in a larger universe. As the fighting game community continues to grow and evolve, Darkstalkers remains a beloved piece of Capcom's history, a series that dared to be different, and in doing so, left an indelible mark on the genre. The series may have been overshadowed in its time, but its legacy continues to haunt the fighting game landscape, influencing modern titles and inspiring a new generation of developers to experiment and innovate. Fan demand and the future of Darkstalkers. Will we ever get another game? While Darkstalkers hasn't had a new entry in decades, its characters have remained incredibly popular. This is particularly true for Morrigan Ainsland, whose allure has transcended the franchise itself. Morrigan, the succubus with her iconic wings, has become a staple in crossover games like Marvel vs. Capcom and Capcom vs. SNK. She's not just a guest star. In many cases, Morrigan is used as a selling point. In fact, Morrigan has appeared in more non-Darkstalkers games than the total number of Darkstalkers titles in existence. This phenomenon extends beyond Morrigan. Characters like Felicia, the cheerful Catwoman, and Jida, the regal, blood-manipulating demon, have found their way into various Capcom games. Their continued presence keeps the franchise alive in the minds of players, showing Capcom that there's still a market for these characters. When Morrigan appeared in the second Marvel vs. Capcom 3 trailer, fighting against Iron Man, it was a clear sign of her continued prominence, even when facing off against some of the most popular comic book heroes of all time. Perhaps what's most remarkable about Darkstalkers is its fanbase's dedication. Despite the long hiatus, fans continue to produce art, fan fiction, and of course, cosplays. Morrigan, again, leads the charge here, her seductive style making her one of the most cosplayed characters in the fighting game world. People dress up as Felicia, Lilith, and even the lesser-known characters, bringing Darkstalkers to conventions and social media alike. This isn't just casual love, it's fervent support. Fans continue to purchase remakes, participate in online tournaments, and actively engage in community-driven content. Every time a Darkstalkers re-release or crossover happens, the fanbase rallies to show Capcom that the interest is still very much alive. Capcom even acknowledged this devotion when they re-released Darkstalkers Resurrection in 2013, a high-definition remaster of Night Warriors, Darkstalkers Revenge, and Darkstalkers 3. The re-release showed that even with minimal promotion and fanfare, Darkstalkers still had legs, making it into the top 10 sales for the PlayStation Network that month. Despite the market being oversaturated with fighting games, Darkstalkers Resurrection performed well, giving hope to fans that a new title could be on the horizon. But then came the blow. Darkstalkers Resurrection didn't hit Capcom's sales expectations. In an industry where selling 2 million copies is often considered merely okay, Resurrection didn't make the cut, and that seemingly sealed the fate of a potential Darkstalkers 4. Producer Yoshinori Ono confirmed that Capcom wouldn't be greenlighting a new game anytime soon, putting an end to fan dreams, at least temporarily. In typical Ono fashion, he joked that fans would need to buy around 4 million copies to make a sequel viable, but behind the humor was a stark reality. Capcom, a company now driven by high expectations and massive sales numbers, wasn't ready to bet on a niche series like Darkstalkers unless it promised to be a huge commercial success. The issue with Darkstalkers Resurrection wasn't just the sales, but also Capcom's approach to it. Fans didn't want a re-release of old games, they wanted a brand new entry, with new characters, new mechanics, and updated visuals. The nostalgia was appreciated, but it wasn't enough to quench the thirst for something truly fresh. It was as if Capcom missed the point. Fans wanted more than a quick cash grab. They wanted to see Darkstalkers evolve, just like Street Fighter did. But hope isn't completely lost. While Capcom may have shelved the idea for now, the demand for a new Darkstalkers game has never fully disappeared. Fighting games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter have seen major resurgences in recent years, driven by the rise of esports and online competitive play. The genre may have once been considered oversaturated, but now it's thriving, with major tournaments, streaming, and a dedicated competitive community that spans the globe. Capcom itself has seen massive success with Street Fighter V, which despite a rocky launch became one of the mainstays of competitive fighting games, thanks to continued support and updates. Similarly, Mortal Kombat 11 has proven that even decades-old franchises can come back stronger than ever. So why not Darkstalkers? The gaming world has shown that there is still plenty of room for classic fighting games, especially those with a unique identity, like Darkstalkers. The fact that Morrigan, Felicia, and others still appear in crossover game shows that Capcom hasn't completely forgotten about the series. They know the potential is there. And with the popularity of dark Gothic aesthetics in gaming, just look at titles like Bloodborne and Castlevania. Darkstalkers could find a new audience in today's market. One of the biggest hurdles Capcom faces is the company's own history of mishandling its properties. Take Mega Man Legends 3, for example. It was a highly anticipated title that was abruptly cancelled, leaving fans frustrated. Capcom has a habit of dangling potential sequels in front of fans, only to pull them back when sales targets aren't met. This has led to a strained relationship with parts of the fanbase, who feel like they've been let down too many times. The same can be said for Darkstalkers. Capcom teased a potential return for years, only to back out when the financials didn't add up. This stop-and-start approach has frustrated fans, but it has also created a situation where demand continues to build. It's almost like a slow burn. The more Capcom teases and pulls back, the more fans want it. So, will we ever get Darkstalkers 4? It's hard to say for sure, but there are reasons to be optimistic. Capcom has shown that they are willing to revive dormant franchises if the demand is there. Resident Evil saw a resurgence with the incredible success of the remakes, and Devil May Cry 5 proved that Capcom is willing to bring back fan-favorite franchises when the time is right. The key will be whether Capcom believes Darkstalkers can find a new audience beyond just the hardcore fanbase. The competitive fighting game scene is bigger than ever, and nostalgia is a powerful tool. With the right marketing, modernized mechanics, and a respectful nod to its roots, Darkstalkers could easily make a comeback. In the meantime, fans will continue to rally behind the franchise. They'll continue to cosplay as Morrigan, write fan fiction about Jida, and share their love for Felicia on social media. And who knows, maybe one day Capcom will finally answer the call. After all, if there's one thing Darkstalkers fans have proven, it's that they're not going anywhere. As long as the characters of Darkstalkers remain in the spotlight through crossovers, fan art, and community love, the door to a new game isn't fully closed. While Capcom has set high sales targets, the ever-evolving gaming landscape might just provide the perfect opportunity for the return of Darkstalkers. Until then, we'll keep our fingers crossed, and maybe, just maybe, Capcom will decide that the time is right to let these monsters roam once again. Conclusion: Darkstalkers' place in fighting game history. With that, we come to the very end of the video. Darkstalkers occupies a crucial yet underrated position in fighting game history. Launched in 1994, the series introduced key innovations that influenced the entire genre. From chain combos and air blocking to its EX move system, Darkstalkers pushed the boundaries of what a 2D fighter could be. Its distinctive Gothic horror aesthetic, featuring a cast of supernatural creatures, stood out from the typical roster of martial artists, injecting personality and creativity into the genre. While overshadowed by the juggernauts of Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, Darkstalkers became a cult favorite, influencing modern titles like Marvel vs. Capcom and BlazBlue. Its colorful and quirky characters like Morrigan, Felicia, and Dimitri continue to shine in crossovers and fan tributes, keeping the spirit of the franchise alive even without a new mainline entry. Darkstalkers' legacy lies in its ability to blend tight mechanics with offbeat design, proving that fighting games can be as fun as they are technical. It helped set the stage for the genre's evolution, leaving an imprint that still echoes through modern fighters. Though Capcom hasn't released a new game in the series since the 90s, Darkstalkers remains an essential part of fighting game history, with a fanbase that continues to clamour for its return. Whether or not we see another installment, its impact on the genre is undeniable, cementing its place as a Gothic gem in the fighting game world. And of course, if you're as much of a Darkstalkers fan as we are, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the histories of your favourite games. The night is still young, and so are we.